According to my mom, she works at NASA. The entire class laughed until someone with a badge entered the room and altered the atmosphere. It was a Tuesday, shortly after recess, and the classroom had a subtle scent of hand sanitizer and pencil shavings. Ms. Lawson had just finished roll call when she clapped her hands and announced, "All right, it's time for our What My Parent Does presentations." One after another, students share their stories. A father who worked as a firefighter, a mother employed a local bakery, a brother serving in the army who was acknowledged with a round of applause, even though technically he didn't count. Next came Talia Jefferson's introduction. She rose deliberately, clutching a small index card displaying her name in purple ink. Talia was known as one of the quieter students in class. She was intelligent but preferred not to raise her hand simply to speak. She surveyed the room, making no direct eye contact, and stated distinctly, "My mom works at NASA." A pause followed. Then came quiet chuckles, escalating into laughter, not a sudden outburst, but a wave that grew stronger as confused and amused glances circulated. "Wait, NASA?" Someone called from the rear. "You mean like the space agency?" Another voice whispered, perhaps a little too loudly. Even Ms. Lawson seemed surprised. She didn't laugh. Instead, her eyebrows rose a little, as if she found it difficult to accept. Talia blinked deliberately, remaining silent and still. She didn't shout. She didn't flee. She simply stood, her expression composed, her hands unwavering. "Yes," she confirmed, stating that she works at NASA and is a systems engineer. The word seemed out of place. Ms. Lawson, positioned close to the board, offered a strained smile, signaling a transition to the next item. "Well, thank you, Talia," she said, already looking over her clipboard. Next, it was Owen's turn. Talia resumed her seat, disregarding the laughter and the subtle gestures. Her fingers tightened around the bottom of her shirt. Her expression remained composed, though her cheeks felt flushed. Owen began to discuss his dad's plumbing business, but Talia registered very little of what he said. She was certain they didn't accept her story, not a single one of them, not even the teacher. They found the task unbelievable, but even more so, they doubted the individual presenting it. A girl with deep brown skin, her tight braids secured with a soft pink scrunchie. She carried a hand-me-down backpack with a broken zipper. Her shoes were well worn, and she didn't use elaborate language or speak with great volume. Therefore, when she mentioned NASA, it sounded to them like a fantasy, like a game. During Owen's presentation, a piece of paper was passed to her desk. A boy named Theo leaned towards her and asked if she cleaned the bathrooms or something. Talia remained silent. She didn't cry, not at that moment. As the bell signaled the end of class and students scrambled for their backpacks, she remained seated, her gaze fixed on the classroom door. She had never before wished her mom held a different position, one that was simpler to discuss, one that didn't invite curious glances. Nevertheless, even then, she held onto the conviction that it was important. Her mom had once shared with her that some truths are too profound for limited understanding. One simply allows them to mature. Talia exited that classroom with her head held high, despite a knot in her stomach. She felt no personal shame. Her concern was for those around her. However, she was unaware that the learning experience wasn't complete. This applied to her classmates and to Ms. Lawson as well. The Jefferson House was located close to a peaceful road in Mobile, Alabama. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was neat, painted a light yellow with green shutters. It was the sort of place where the porch light was consistently illuminated before nightfall, and the screen door made a slight creak upon entry. Talia entered through that door at a slower pace than normal. Removing her sneakers, she dropped her backpack close to the staircase and went directly to the kitchen. The aroma of garlic and onions indicated her mom had arrived home earlier than usual. Dr. Renee Jefferson was at the stove, stirring something in a large red pot. She didn't immediately acknowledge her. "You're late," she stated, not unkindly, simply observing it. Talia selected a chair and sat down. "Had to remain behind to clean the desks," she murmured. Renee turned, observed her daughter's expression, and adjusted the flame. Talia remained silent for a moment. Her hands rested in her lap, nervously playing with the sleeves of her hoodie. She appeared eager to speak, but struggled to begin. We laughed, Talia said at last. Renee understood immediately who she meant. She drew out the chair opposite her daughter and sat. There were no outbursts, no displays of shock or fear. Why? I informed them that you were employed at NASA. Renee gave a barely perceptible nod, and they didn't believe you. One kid suggested you might have cleaned the bathrooms. Renee took a shallow breath, a momentary pause to compose herself. And what was your response? You didn't offer one. Ms. Lawson quickly moved on, seemingly avoiding the issue. That action caused Renee's eyebrows to twitch almost imperceptibly, but she maintained a level tone. Do you think you said something incorrect? Talia glanced up sharply. No. Don't accept their lack of understanding as your fault. They laughed, and that's their responsibility, not yours. A moment of silence followed as the bubbling from the pot filled the space. Outside, a dog barked twice and then stopped. You know, Renee said, rising to stir the food again, when I first told people I wanted to work in aerospace, my high school guidance counselor told me to be more realistic. Said I should consider secretarial work. Talia looked up, eyes wide. That occurred in 1998. I didn't engage in an argument with her. I simply ceased visiting her office. Did it cause pain? Renee extinguished the stove and turned to her daughter. Yes, but also ignited a spark. I wasn't feeling anger towards her. I was resolved not to allow her to dictate who I could be. Talia smiled. Just a little. She appreciated that her mom consistently found a way to speak honestly, but not in a sensationalized way. There was resilience in her composure. You know, I could attend your class, Renee mentioned casually. Parent days are this Friday, correct? Talia blinked. You do that? She asked. I get the day off anyway, and it might be fun. Renee replied, but what would you wear? Talia's eyes lit up. Renee grinned. I was thinking maybe my NASA badge and that black blazer you hate. Talia responded, okay, yeah, do that. They both laughed then, a real, from-the-belly kind of laughter. The air in the kitchen felt lighter. Renee served them both bowls of stew and set them on the table. While they ate, she shared stories with Talia about her first job interview and the time she accidentally spilled coffee on a flight simulator keyboard. The stories made Talia giggle, and she no longer felt small. She felt lucky. Remember, Renee said as they finished, you don't owe anyone proof. But if the moment comes when you feel like showing them, just know I've got your back. Talia nodded slowly, cheeks full of food and her badge. Renee smirked that too. She wasn't intending to simply make a statement. She aimed to transform the atmosphere of the room. Talia hadn't realized this yet. Friday arrived sooner than Talia anticipated. Throughout the entire week, rumors continued to circulate within the classroom, much like dust in sunlight. Several students attempted apologies through hesitant gestures. One offered her a crushed fruit snack. Another quietly said, I was just joking. However, the majority behaved as if nothing had occurred. This suited Talia just fine. She hadn't forgotten. As the morning bell signaled the start of the day, the classroom was filled with excited energy. Ms. Lawson had organized the desks in a horseshoe shape, creating space for parents to be seated and present. She wore a purple blouse and had placed a tray of sugar cookies, clearly purchased from a grocery store, as a somewhat feeble attempt to create a celebratory atmosphere. Talia was positioned near the center, her backpack carefully placed beneath her chair. She felt anxious, though not frightened. It was a feeling of anticipation. She had not informed anyone that her mom would be present. The first parents arrived approximately at 9:15. This included a man wearing a mechanic's uniform, a woman in scrubs, and several moms carrying tote bags and Starbucks cups, who greeted with somewhat overenthusiastic smiles and waves. The presentation commenced, punctuated by applause and gentle laughter. One dad shared a story about repairing a sink that had unexpectedly burst. Another mom recounted her experience of teaching yoga to toddlers. Talia repeatedly looked toward the door. Precisely as Ms. Lawson began introducing the subsequent speaker, the door opened. Dr. Renee Jefferson entered the room. She was wearing the black blazer that Talia found so off-putting, perfectly tailored and crisp. Her NASA Johnson Space Center identification badge hung from a Navy lanyard, paired with black slacks and no jewelry except for a silver watch. Her expression was calm, not smug, not flashy, simply present. The room fell silent instantly. Even the air seemed to still. Ms. Lawson stammered, and Talia stood up, announcing, "This is my mom, Dr. Renee Jefferson." The teacher's eyes widened momentarily before a smile spread across their face. "All right, welcome." They gestured. "Would you like to tell us about your work?" Renee responded with a courteous nod. "Certainly. Good morning, everyone. I'm an aerospace systems engineer at NASA. I work on mission planning, flight systems integration, and operation strategy for our lunar and Mars programs." Several heads turned in the direction of Talia. A few mouths dropped open, and one student quietly whispered, "Whoa." Renee proceeded calmly. Her voice had a measured cadence, clear, smooth, and steady. "A significant portion of my work focuses on designing systems that ensure astronauts can travel safely in space. We examine all aspects, from their respiration to the transmission of data back to Earth." She paused, allowing the statement to sink in. "I'm not here to impress you," she added, observing the room. "I came here because my daughter mentioned she's spoken with you, and some of you expressed doubt about my work." Silence. Talia could hear her own heartbeat. She refused to blink. Renee approached the whiteboard and indicated a printed diagram she had prepared, a genuine schematic from a previous project. "You don't need to grasp every detail. That's perfectly acceptable," she stated, addressing the group. "But the next time you hear something that seems unbelievable, pause before dismissing it. Because innovation can emerge unexpectedly," she said, then turned to her daughter. "And when someone shares a truth with conviction, allow it to remain as it is, don't diminish it." Ms. Lawson cleared her throat. "Thank you, Dr. Jefferson. That was very enlightening." Renee smiled and walked over to sit beside Talia, who was trying not to grin. The room proceeded slowly after that. The next parent began their presentation about running a car dealership. There was no laughter, no whispering. And Talia, she sat up straighter than she ever had before. She didn't look around for affirmation. She didn't require it. At that moment, her truth resonated strongly, accessible to all present. However, many failed to recognize that the woman they had just encountered hadn't always experienced being heard. Her journey to NASA encompassed countless instances mirroring this one. Prior to becoming Dr. Renee Jefferson, she was simply Renee Lewis, a slender teenager with oversized glasses and notebooks filled with diagrams that held no interest for anyone else in her neighborhood. Growing up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, she lived in a house with a sagging front porch, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs to pay the bills. From a young age, she preferred machines to makeup. While other girls enjoyed playing jump rope, Renee constructed small devices from discarded fans and obsolete cassette players. Her uncle once described her as odd, but she viewed that as a positive attribute. At 13, she borrowed a book from the public library about space shuttles and devoured it completely in a single night. By 14, she was independently learning fundamental programming concepts. She rarely discussed this at school. She quickly discovered that expressing a desire to work at NASA would often result in ridicule or dismissal. Her educators didn't encourage her. This wasn't due to a lack of intelligence. Renee consistently earned straight A's across all subjects. Instead, they had formed preconceived notions about her future. "You'd be exceptionally organized," one counselor remarked to her. "You'd excel as a receptionist." Upon mentioning her intention to apply to a summer program for young engineers at Georgia Tech, her math teacher expressed surprise. He remarked that it was highly competitive and questioned if she was certain about spending the application fee. Despite this, she submitted her application and was accepted. That summer proved transformative. She found herself among peers who approached problem solving in a similar manner, with notebooks brimming with questions and uninhibited curiosity. She returned with a collection of blueprints and a newfound sense of purpose. College presented its own challenges. At Auburn University, she found herself one of just 3 black women within the entire engineering department. During collaborative assignments, she frequently was asked to record notes rather than work on calculations. Instructors continued to mispronounce her name, even after 3 semesters had passed. Despite these difficulties, she remained steadfast, consistently attending classes. Renee supported herself by working evenings at a diner close to campus and providing tutoring services to high school students on weekends. There were moments when she contemplated abandoning her studies. It wasn't a matter of her inability to manage the workload. The difficulties stemmed from the draining effort of constantly having to demonstrate her place. During one spring, following a successful thermodynamics midterm, she overheard 2 classmates speaking privately behind her. One suggested she must have received assistance, and the other speculated she may have copied from another student. Instead of confronting them, she didn't shed tears. She simply returned home, opened her textbook, and began preparing for the upcoming finals. By the semester's conclusion, she achieved the top rank within her department. It was an unspoken understanding amongst them, but they recognized it. Following graduation, she completed an internship at Lockheed Martin. Subsequently, she submitted an application to NASA, which she considered a long shot. However, her qualifications were undeniable. The acceptance call arrived in March while she was in a laundromat, surrounded by wet towels and with only one dryer operational. Her mother wept on the phone for a full 5 minutes. From there, the substantial effort commenced. The meetings, the designs, the late nights, the subtle glances in conference rooms, the moments where she had to repeat herself 3 times to be heard. But she persisted in voicing her thoughts, because whenever she worked at a console or drafted a fresh concept, she recalled a younger version of herself who only needed one person to believe it was achievable. Now, as she entered her daughter's 5th grade classroom, the badge swaying from her neck, she represented more than just herself. She stood for every girl who had ever been told, "People like you don't do that." However, this wasn't about proving a point anymore. It was about establishing something new in her daughter, a foundation that couldn't be undermined. The following Monday, subtle changes were noticeable, not in a dramatic fashion, but through small shifts. The shift was subtle, something you'd only perceive if you were paying close attention. When Talia entered class, she anticipated no special welcome, and none arrived, but the atmosphere felt different. People didn't visibly react when she spoke. Theo didn't whisper. In fact, he completely avoided looking at her. During recess, 2 girls, Kennedy and Samira, approached her near the jungle gym. They stood nearby, uncomfortably, shifting their weight. "My mom said your mom's speech was really something," Kennedy said, chewing her bottom lip. "She seemed intelligent, genuinely so." "She is," Talia answered promptly. Samira concurred. "I researched NASA after school," she explained. "It's quite interesting." That was their brief exchange. Yet they remained. And for the first time all year, the 3 of them settled on the bench and discussed a topic beyond snack trades or slime videos. Later that day, Ms. Lawson spoke privately with Talia as the class prepared to leave. "I wanted to say something," she began, her voice softer than normal. "Regarding last week," Talia looked up, attentive. "I should have managed that situation differently," Ms. Lawson continued. "I ought to have asked more questions rather than proceeding so quickly. I apologize." Talia wasn't certain how to respond. She rarely encountered adults offering apologies in that manner. She nodded once, deliberately. That was sufficient for the present, though not everyone experienced a change of perspective. Certain children still spoke in hushed tones, but they did so with greater discretion. Some observed her with an expectation of failure, seemingly needing her to falter to reaffirm their own perspectives. One boy, Dean, would quietly say NASA kid whenever she passed, as if attempting to diminish her accomplishments. Talia remained composed. She did not react defensively or retreat. Instead, she continued her efforts. She engaged more frequently in class, volunteering answers even when uncertain of the correctness. Now, even making mistakes didn't intimidate her, not as it once had. One afternoon during group work, she overheard a classmate say, "She thinks she's better than us." Talia looked up calmly and replied, "No, I just know I belong here." No further debate followed. At home, Renee observed the change as well. Talia spoke more at dinner. sharing small details about her day without needing to be prompted repeatedly. And she began drawing again, shifting away from cartoons towards diagrams, similar to those her mother created. Rockets, helmets, star maps in pencil. One evening, Renee discovered a post-it note affixed to the fridge. It stated, "I'm going to work there too, love, Talia." She left it untouched for 3 days. However, this wasn't solely about demonstrating assurance. A more profound shift had occurred within Talia. It was no longer a matter of disproving anyone. It was about embracing her own authenticity, recognizing truth regardless of criticism. During gym class, when the teacher requested they write down a goal not related to sports, Talia wrote, "Engineer, space missions just like my mom." When the teacher announced it, there were no laughs. The class simply listened. However, at home, a different feeling arose. It was a still moment shared between mother and daughter, solidifying all they had experienced. It was Friday night again. A full week had passed since Parent Day, and the house was filled with the aroma of Renee's renowned lemon chicken. Talia sat at the kitchen table, sketching a new design, a rotating satellite with solar panels shaped like flower petals. She worked quietly, pausing occasionally to erase or examine an angle. Renee watched from the sink, carefully drying a dish. The focused way her daughter drew, with her tongue slightly pressed against her upper lip, brought back memories of herself at 12, always constructing something in her mind. "Would you like to take a break?" Renee asked softly. Talia looked up. "Almost finished." Renee smiled, resting against the counter. "You've been working on that for 2 hours." Talia replied, "I know, I just wanted to look right." She completed the final line and showed the paper to her mom. Renee approached and examined it closely. "Explain it to me." Talia said, "Well, it's a satellite, but instead of keeping all the panels flat, they open up like this." She demonstrated the shape with her hands. "So it can collect more energy when it turns, depending on the angle of the sun." Renee acknowledged with a nod, clearly impressed. "That's a clever approach. Where did that idea originate?" Talia replied, "I'm not entirely sure. I had been considering sunflowers earlier, observing how they track the sun's movement. The concept simply arose." Renee took a seat next to her, carefully placing the paper on the table. "You know what I appreciate most about that idea?" She inquired. "What?" Renee responded. "You weren't attempting to make a favorable impression. You were simply striving to resolve an issue." Talia glanced at the drawing once more. "Yes, I suppose so." They remained there for a moment in quiet contemplation. A comfortable silence settled. Then Talia spoke again, her voice gentler. "Do you think they truly believed me?" "After you left," Renee placed her hand on the table. "Some did, some still don't. That's not something you can always manage. So what is the solution? You continue to reappear. That's the challenging aspect. Not a single time, but repeatedly. You articulate the truth, even when it seems as though nobody listens." Talia considered that as you did. Renee offered a gentle smile, similar to the one I still offer. "Was it always this difficult for you?" Renee reclined in the chair, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes more so, but I stopped expecting it to become simple." Talia regarded her mother, seeing her not only as a parent, but as an individual. Someone who had overcome obstacles she hadn't even been aware of. Someone who possessed quiet strength without needing external validation. "I used to wish you had a conventional job." Renee laughed, something straightforward to describe. Talia observed her mother's reaction, recognizing the discomfort when people inquired. "Now, I find it quite admirable, truly admirable." Renee reached out and gently tucked one of her daughter's braids behind her ear. "I'm proud of you, she said. Not because of what you said in class, but because you said it anyway." Talia felt a warmth in her chest, not just pride, but relief. A weight she hadn't noticed until it started to lift. "I didn't think you were going to come that day," she admitted. Renee raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" she asked. "I thought maybe you'd think it wasn't worth it." Renee hesitated. Then she moved nearer, speaking with a resolute and unwavering tone. "Anything that impacts your self-perception is always deserving of support." Little needed to be said after that. Talia rose and proceeded to the refrigerator, took a magnet, and attached her artwork directly beside the grocery list. Renee observed her, feeling a sense of quiet contentment. Not every learning experience warranted recognition. Some simply existed, perceptible only to those who had rightfully gained them. There remained one final point to share, not directed at Talia, but for those still discovering what excellence resembles. The following week, during the morning announcements, Ms. Lawson took an unanticipated action. She presented a student submission from the Career Dreams bulletin board and read it aloud to the class. "This one is from Talia Jefferson," she announced. She wrote, "I want to build machines that will reach places no person has ever reached because someone must discover how to get us there, and I believe I can." There was no laughter this time, only silence. Several students turned to observe her, not with incredulity, but with something approaching respect. Talia sat at her desk, serene and concentrated, sketching miniature gears in the borders of her notebook. She didn't require a glance upward, nor did she need the room to applaud. That wasn't the focus, as this narrative was never centered on recognition. It concerned honesty, about maintaining conviction when others expressed doubt, about the significance of speaking clearly, not noisily. However, the individuals in that classroom had observed something unexpected. A woman with qualifications, certainly. Beyond that, she was a woman with a clear sense of self, someone who didn't require authorization to express herself, and a daughter who witnessed her interspaces devoid of faith and yet infused them with strength. Renee didn't need to speak loudly. She didn't need to detail her achievements. Her presence was sufficient. However, it was Talia who bore the burden of that day. She endured the flames of mockery, remained within them, and emerged stronger. It can be challenging to express self-belief, particularly when facing a lack of external validation. The core message extends beyond the nature of a parent's profession or the perceived grandeur of their role. It centers on the lessons we impart to our children, not through spoken words, but through demonstrable actions. Affirming your child instills resilience. Consistently supporting them cultivates bravery. Even a brief moment in a crowded room, standing near them, demonstrates what it truly means to be heard. When a child experiences being seen, not only by a teacher or a classmate, but by the wider world, they cease to diminish their presence. They stop doubting themselves. They begin to carry themselves with the confidence of someone who has something significant to contribute. Because they do. Talia no longer needed to persuade anyone. She wasn't waiting for the class to accept her. She had already moved forward, now concentrating on what she thought achievable. This is what makes narratives like hers significant. Because for each child who has been ridiculed, overlooked, or interrupted, there's another opportunity awaiting. A moment when the door opens, when the badge is displayed, when silence transforms into respect, and it remains with them. At the conclusion of the school year, when the class created their memory book, a page was designated most likely to. Beneath Talia's photograph, a message read, seemingly with the intention of sending something into space. She reacted with a smile, not due to the coolness of the statement, but because this time it appeared to be genuine. Therefore, the next time a child expresses a significant aspiration, refrain from immediate skepticism. Avoid limiting their potential to your current understanding. Allow them to surpass your expectations. And for parents observing this, be present, even when it feels challenging, particularly when it's truly important. Vocalize your belief in them. For more stories like this, please subscribe. These are stories that highlight true strength. He entered the bank, his appearance marked by a tattered coat and old shoes. People assumed he was simply another person experiencing homelessness. Then, he spoke calmly, stating, "I own the land this building sits on," and presented documentation to support his claim. The door's chimes sounded as it always did upon entry, yet few people acknowledged it. They barely glanced up. A few fleeting looks were all it received. One woman subtly shifted her position to observe him before returning to her computer screen. Another took a sip of her coffee and rolled her eyes, murmuring something to the teller beside her. A man entering the space appeared out of sync with the surroundings, not threatening, simply different. The environment consisted of shiny glass, polished tile, and Bluetooth headsets visible behind the counters. This was Morris Coltrane Langston, age 62, with a thick gray beard. His coat was 2 sizes too large, and his jeans suggested a past no one wished to explore. He moved deliberately, not due to age, but with caution. Each step felt significant, as if he were assessing his place within the setting. He approached the counter where Brittany was working. She offered him a brief look. "Sir, a bank card or ID is required for withdrawals," she stated plainly. Morris offered a gentle smile, though it seemed weary. "I don't require a withdrawal. I need to discuss property," he said. Brittany's eyes widened slightly. She glanced at her colleague, who was visibly trying to contain laughter. "Property?" she asked. "Yes," he confirmed. "I believe I own the land this bank is built on." At that moment, the laughter erupted. The message originated from Cliff Yarrow, the assistant branch manager, who had approached, arms crossed. Cliff was a man who displayed his authority prominently. He made no attempt to conceal his amusement. "Sir, I believe you are at the incorrect building," Cliff stated. "This is not the county records office. You cannot simply enter and declare ownership of a bank." "I did not say I own the bank," Maurice responded, his voice quiet. "I said I own the land. There's a distinction." Now, all eyes were upon him. The security guard, identified as Lee, who typically appeared to be checking his phone near the door, stood up straighter and moved forward. Cliff questioned, "Do you have any paperwork to back that up?" Maurice slowly reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, Lee reacted, conditioned by experience to anticipate a potential threat when a black man reached into a pocket. However, Morris's movements were unhurried and non-threatening. He carried the envelope deliberately, as if accustomed to it. He produced a thick, crumpled packet. The pages were yellowed with worn edges, having been folded and unfolded numerous times. At the top, it read, "Franklin Delroy, 1913 land deed." Below that were stamped legal seals and notary signatures. "I've held on to this since my father passed," I said. "And he kept it since his father passed," Maurice added. The deed belonged to a black-owned cooperative that obtained plots throughout this section of Knoxville during the Reconstruction era. I tapped the envelope gently. "This confirms my grandfather did not sell the land. It was leased. Ownership returned to us following a default, though this information was never shared." Brittany's smirk disappeared. Lee stopped scrolling. Cliff cleared his throat. "I believe it's time for you to leave, sir," he stated. "I think it's time someone examines the contents," Maurice said calmly. Then, an unexpected event occurred. A man from the office furthest to the left, John Delgado, the branch manager, emerged. He had been observing through the glass for the preceding few minutes. He requested the documents. Morris provided them immediately. John escorted them back to his office. A period of silence followed, lasting briefly. Subsequently, 5 minutes elapsed, then 10. Eventually, John appeared. His expression was altered. "Connect me with regional compliance on the line." Immediately, he stated. As phones began to ring and conversations grew concerned, Maurice remained still at his position by the counter. He was anticipating something, and they all understood, instinctively, that it wasn't a monetary request. Cliff walked back and forth behind the teller row, massaging the back of his neck, as if that would aid his comprehension of what he's heard. John Delgado continued on the phone, speaking in brief, strained sentences to someone at corporate. His office blinds were partially closed, but every few seconds, a glimpse of his face emerged from the gap. He wasn't smiling anymore. Brittany stood uncomfortably at her station, looking sideways at Maurice, who hadn't moved from his position. His hands were folded, and documents rested gently on the counter in front of him. "Do you want to sit down?" she finally asked, her voice softer. Maurice shook his head. "I've done enough sitting in my life." A man in a tailored suit and thick-rimmed glasses walked in briskly from the back entrance. His ID badge read Gerald Tisdale, Regional Property and Compliance. He went straight to Delgado's office without a word. Moments later, John opened the door again and waved for Maurice. "Sir, would you mind stepping in for a moment?" Maurice nodded once and retrieved his envelope. His boots made a slight scuffing sound against the tile as he entered the office. As the door closed behind him, the remaining staff members quieted. No one spoke. Even the security guard adjusted his position, uncertain whether to remain nearby or act as if nothing was occurring. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. "Mr. Langston," Gerald stated cautiously, "I've reviewed the original deed and the tax history you provided. Could you please tell us where you've been keeping these documents?" "My father kept it in a box of his belongings," Maurice responded. "He was a carpenter, building houses in Alcoa and Maryville before his knees failed. After he passed away, I kept the papers in a locker at a storage unit I used when I lacked permanent housing." Delgado appeared astonished. "You're saying this land was never sold? That the trust was still active?" Maurice retrieved a smaller, more recent envelope and gave it to Gerald. Inside was a typed letter from a small firm in Chattanooga, a probate specialist named Lena Fry, confirming the lapse in city filings and the reversion clause in the original agreement. The letter was dated 6 months ago. I only found it after she assisted me in reviewing some of my dad's old files. "Thought it was junk at first," Gerald said, staring at the paper. His mouth opened a little, but he didn't speak. "Legally," Maurice explained, "this building stood on land that was part of my grandfather's estate. The lease agreement had been temporary. As the bank underwent mergers and changes in ownership over the years, the arrangement wasn't renewed. They simply built on the land, presuming no one would inquire." Delgado rubbed his temple. "That represented decades of transactions," Maurice stated, "and not a single one examined the records far enough back. Everyone seemed to think the past had resolved itself." Gerald rose quickly and gazed out the office window. "We need to involve legal right away," he stated. "Already done," John responded quietly. A voice drifted from outside the office, speaking too loudly. Why would a homeless man return for this now? What would he possibly do with a piece of land beneath a bank? Inside, Maurice noticed. He glanced towards the window, then resumed looking at Gerald. "I didn't come for money," he said. "I came seeking the truth, and perhaps a measure of respect." Gerald turned, finally meeting my eyes. There was a pause. "You are not wrong, but while discussions focused on compliance and liability, something else was unfolding in the lobby." Whispers had escalated to murmurs, and one employee was already texting someone outside the bank. The story, as it turns out, began long before Maurice ever entered that bank. Prior to the advent of smartphones, before suburban expansion consumed agricultural land, before the concept of a man like Maurice could be envisioned, standing serenely with a document, contesting the very core of a multi-million-dollar organization. In 1913, Franklin Delroy, Morris's grandfather, was 23 years old and already recognized within Blount County for his skilled workmanship. His hands constructed churches, schoolhouses, and porches that remained standing a century later. Unbeknownst to many, Franklin was also a member of a discreet, close-knit group of black tradesmen, farmers, and ministers who combined their resources to purchase land. The purpose wasn't financial gain, but a matter of dignity. They identified as the East Bluntland Cooperative, and throughout the years, they obtained small plots on the periphery of what was then essentially cow pasture. However, Franklin, ever the visionary, included a specific provision in his deed. Should the land ever undergo development, leasing, or a claim by another party without a sale, ownership would return to his descendants after a specified duration. In 1927, a lumber company made a payment to lease the land for a limited time. Subsequently, a warehouse was constructed, followed by a small credit union. By the 1970s, that credit union had transformed into a regional bank. And when it was acquired again in 2003, all of the original documents were misplaced, overlooked, or lost within the new ownership. The Delroy family was never notified. Franklin was gone by that point. Morris's father, Jasper Langston, attempted to preserve the family's history. However, circumstances grew difficult. Employment opportunities disappeared, and Jasper began drinking. The traditional stories evolved into mere bedtime stories, losing any sense of verifiable truth. Morris recalled sitting on the porch in his youth, listening to his dad describe the plot by the rail tracks that Granddaddy owned. Yet, it held little significance for him. The stories remained just that, stories, until he matured and understood how families like his were frequently excluded from their own history. In 2020, When COVID caused widespread closures and Morris was residing in a church basement in Sevierville, he finally sorted through the last of his father's possessions. Among them, he discovered the original deed carefully wrapped in wax paper, and within it, a small note written in his dad's handwriting. If you find this, don't let him tell you we didn't leave anything behind. Morris took that note with great importance. He dedicated months to research at the public library. He made trips to the county clerk's office. He consulted with Lena Fry, the probate attorney who remained professional when he shared the story with her. She located the land records and carefully compared parcel numbers, and she verified his findings. The land, now valued at millions, had been leased, not sold. The original clause remained in effect. No legal purchase had ever occurred. Consequently, after years of homelessness, this situation seems quite unusual. Morris entered the building constructed upon his grandfather's land and stated something unexpected. "I believe this belongs to me." At the bank, John Delgado now had the documents spread across his desk. They contained a century's worth of signatures, carbon copies, and ink stamps from courthouses that no longer existed. Gerald, the regional compliance officer, examined one page as if it had committed a personal offense. According to this clause, he stated, the property returns to the original family if the lease expires without renewal or sale. John confirmed this had occurred twice, and the family was not notified. That's correct. A significant silence followed. Then Gerald quietly expressed concern, saying, "We're in trouble." Maurice remained seated opposite them, silent. He showed no sign of a smile. However, a sense of calm was evident on his face. It was as if a man had, at long last, joined together all the pieces of a puzzle and possessed the perseverance to complete it. As events aligned within that office, a woman on her lunch break began live streaming the growing disturbance outside the bank. The unfolding situation quickly transcended their internal narrative. The lobby's ambience underwent a change. Initial silent assessment evolved into quiet wonder. The atmosphere then became something different altogether, a palpable sense of nervous anticipation. A teller had moved away from her workspace and was positioned by the coffee machine, appearing to stir sugar while observing the office door as if expecting someone to enter. The security guard had repositioned himself, now standing nearer to Morris's chair, seemingly not for protection, but perhaps to observe. Beyond the glass partitions, John Delgado's office was full. Gerald Tisdale was participating in a video conference with a group of legal representatives from corporate, their faces difficult to interpret. A senior counsel, Mark Levin, repeatedly posed the same inquiry. How did this oversight occur? No one could provide a satisfactory explanation. The numerous transfers of ownership involving various parent companies and banks had obscured the documentation until Morris brought it back to their attention. There's a public title gap, Gerald stated. No signed release, no recorded sale. The reversion clause was never satisfied. Mark Levin moved closer to the screen. Does this man, Langston, possess the original documents? John stated that he has more than just documents. He has lineage, and we verified the parcel data. It's the same land. The only alterations were the asphalt and steel constructed upon it. Mark pinched his nose. Okay, here's what we need. Secure a release from this man. Offer a small settlement. Remove him from the building before the press arrives. Maurice, seated quietly nearby, understood their thinking without needing to hear the discussion. He understood the atmosphere. After decades of observing how people assess your value, John ended the call and turned to him. Mr. Langston, would you be willing to settle this today? We could quietly arrange compensation, something equitable. Morris folded his arms. What's fair to you? John paused. That would require negotiation. But if we act quickly, we could avoid unwanted publicity. Maurice chuckled softly. Unwanted by whom? John momentarily looked surprised. A knock sounded at the glass door. A woman, identifiable by the local news logo on her lanyard, smiled and raised her phone. Hello. We've received information that someone entered with a land deed asserting ownership of the bank property. May we speak with Mr. Langston? John's face visibly drained. Who informed you? A voice from the lobby murmured, "The live streams have exceeded 12,000 viewers." Morris rose to his feet deliberately. "There's nothing to be concerned about. I'm not intending to cause a disturbance." Gerald approached. "Mr. Langston, please understand that this situation requires careful handling. It would benefit everyone involved if we could maintain discretion." "I attempted a subtle approach," Maurice stated. "I'm accustomed to quiet. It defined much of my existence." It yielded no progress. A pause settled over the group. Gerald seemed poised to object, but a palpable truth lingered, inescapable. Returning to the lobby, Brittany spoke softly to Maurice. The amusement had vanished from her face. "Do you truly possess this?" she inquired. "I have always possessed it," he replied. The recollection seemed to simply vanish. She lowered her gaze, a hint of embarrassment visible. "I'm sorry." Morris's expression eased a little. "It's not your fault. You were instructed on how to behave when someone like me enters." The bank's doors opened once more, and two additional reporters entered. A man carried a boom microphone over his shoulder. Another began recording with his phone. Cliff attempted to block their entry. "This is private property." A reporter responded, observing Maurice. "Not for long." As inquiries began from the media, Maurice did not seek attention. He instead glanced back at the familiar envelope he held, the one that held his family's history across generations, and understood it was time for the world to know it. Maurice needed no microphone. He needed no formal announcement. He simply needed to remain where he was. That was sufficient. A reporter, a woman in her 40s named Kimber Rowland from WBR, approached. "Mr. Langston, could you verify that you assert ownership of the land the bank occupies?" Maurice met her gaze, unwavering. "I'm not asserting anything," he stated. "I'm presenting facts, and the document in my hand demonstrates what none of you ever took the time to investigate." Kimber nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the significance in his tone. "What outcome are you pursuing with this?" Maurice didn't respond immediately. He turned to address the increasingly large gathering. There were customers, employees, and security present, with some people watching from the sidewalk. "What I'm hoping for," he said finally, "is that the next time someone walks in looking like I do, maybe people won't react with amusement first." The silence that followed was palpable. The young man who had been laughing earlier near the coffee machine suddenly looked down at his shoes. Brittany tightened her grip on her ID badge and avoided his gaze. Cliff shifted uncomfortably and cleared his throat. "Look, sir, I didn't mean any disrespect. You need to comprehend. We simply weren't prepared." There was laughter. Maurice intervened. "You all responded that way. The moment I entered the room, you observed my coat, my shoes, the discoloration on my hands, and you determined I was insignificant." No one spoke. "Have you ever considered how many people you're likely to dismiss each day? Moving around here as if you possess all the knowledge. As if you've already assessed someone's narrative merely by viewing their exterior." John Delgado moved ahead, attempting to redirect the situation. "Mr. Langston, we are ready to offer a formal apology and begin settlement negotiations." Maurice gave him a drawn-out, weary look. "Do you still believe this concerns finances?" A teenager with a camera phone murmured to his friend, out of view of the reporters, "Dude, this person is really committed. Observe the documents." Kimber, perceiving something more significant, inquired, "Where have you been until now? What prompted you to come forward at this time?" Maurice sighed, not in annoyance, simply in contemplation. "Following my dad's passing, I lost interest in matters of this nature. I was preoccupied with basic survival, taking on sporadic jobs like roofing, welding, and janitorial work whenever available. Maintaining stable housing proved difficult when people avoided direct interaction. I experienced periods of both prosperity and hardship, followed by even more challenging times." He paused. "There were nights I slept under bridges and mornings I cleaned the same floors people used to ignore me. However, I never discarded that envelope. The memory of every shelter I stayed in, every town I passed through, remained with me." He held it up gently. "It's all I had left from a man who believed we were worth more than people thought. And one day, I simply grew weary of silence." A woman from the crowd spoke softly. "You kept the deed all these years?" Maurice nodded. 50 years it stayed in our family. Passed from one calloused hand to another, Kimber asked. And what now? He surveyed the bank lobby, his gaze lingering on each employee who had assessed him that morning. What now? He repeated. Now you recall my name. From a corner location, Gerald spoke to John. This is going to be a public relations disaster. However, the individuals within the bank weren't observing Gerald. They were observing Maurice. Truly observing. Some for the first time, as if a barrier had been removed. Not just from his narrative, but from theirs as well. You believe I was unseen? Maurice stated softly. I remained present. You simply didn't observe carefully enough. However, the outside world had already begun to notice. They perceived a man who brought more than just a deed to that building. He carried evidence that dignity isn't derived from affluence. It arises from steadfastly maintaining one's identity. By the following morning, the narrative had spread beyond state lines. Every local news station in Tennessee aired a rendition of it. Some reported inaccuracies. A report suggested Maurice had assumed control of the bank, a claim that proved false. Nevertheless, the message spread. Residents of Blount County, particularly older individuals, began searching through attics and storage boxes, questioning what they might have overlooked. College students shared excerpts online with accompanying text, such as "This exemplifies generational theft." To them, Maurice wasn't a news item. He represented an alert and a sign. At the bank, the situation quickly worsened. Legal representatives from the corporation arrived from elsewhere. Security personnel were now joined by local police officers patrolling the parking lot, employed for crowd management. Demonstrators had assembled along the sidewalk, displaying cardboard signs. Their messages included phrases like "respect land rights." Not just a deed, a legacy. He was right all along. Maurice hadn't organized the gathering, nor had he requested anyone to attend, yet they came. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Gerald Tisdale was pacing once more, his face flushed as he managed calls from corporate and press liaisons. John Delgado was in his office, with the blinds completely shut, feeling the burden of everything. Maurice was in the break room, drinking coffee from paper cup. "Never thought I'd be allowed in here," he remarked, mostly to himself. Kimber Rowland had returned, and her camera crew was filming quietly from the parking lot. She wasn't trying to create problems. She was simply waiting for the story to unfold. That afternoon, a legal representative, Clay Addison, entered the bank. He possessed a clean-shaven appearance, a southern drawl, and wore a silk tie that appeared more valuable than Morris's entire wardrobe. He did not offer a smile. "Mr. Langston," Clay began, settling across from him, "let me start by saying our firm recognizes the validity of your documentation. We are here to discuss terms." Maurice listened intently, remaining still. "You placed our client in a complex situation. We acknowledge the oversight and are ready to present a substantial financial offer for the permanent transfer of ownership." A paper was slid across the table by Clay. Maurice looked at it, then raised his gaze. "You believe this is the core issue?" he inquired, his voice level. "It's a considerable sum," Clay stated. "It's a price," Maurice replied, "and it doesn't come close to covering what you're attempting to resolve." Clay released a sharp breath. "What would be acceptable to you?" Maurice leaned forward, composed but resolute. "I want a plaque with my grandfather's name displayed out front. I also want the official record corrected with the city, and I want a foundation established in his name, one that provides housing for families who have experienced similar circumstances." Clay blinked. "Are you serious?" "I'm absolutely serious." There was a significant pause. Then Clay said, "I will present this to the board." "You please do that." Information about the negotiation became public the same day. And when it did, an unforeseen development occurred. People began making donations. People donated online, in person, and by check. One woman from Jackson traveled 2 hours to personally hand Maurice a $20 bill and express her gratitude for him, ensuring they weren't forgotten. The bank subsequently released a brief statement later that week, stating, "We recognize the validity of Mr. Maurice Langston's claim and are working in good faith to resolve this matter respectfully. We have deep appreciation for the legacy of Franklin Delroy and the community he helped build. While corporate and sanitized, This statement was unexpected. Regarding Maurice, there was no celebration. No press conference was held. He simply exited the bank one afternoon, carrying the same envelope he had entered with. However, this time he wasn't alone. 3 generations of Delroys stood with him in spirit, and hundreds more supported them. While legal teams assessed expenses and public relations teams prepared announcements, the most important aspect had already transpired. Someone like Maurice had finally been acknowledged, and the narrative was no longer controlled by the bank. It belonged to everyone who had ever been forgotten. The sun shone that morning. Maurice Langston stood in front of the bank again. Now, he wasn't standing on disputed land. He was standing on his grandfather's land, officially recognized by the city of Knoxville as part of the Franklin Delroy Legacy Trust. It wasn't just a name on paper anymore. A new plaque had been installed outside the bank's main entrance, embedded in a small brick pedestal near the sidewalk. Bronze letters, clear and lasting. Dedicated to Franklin Delroy, 1890 to 1954, builder, father, landowner. His legacy endures. Maurice touched it softly. The plaque felt cool beneath his fingertips. He remained silent. Words weren't necessary. A small group had assembled for the unveiling. Community leaders, students from the local university, reporters, and some of the same bank staff who previously ridiculed him were present. Brittany stood at the rear, her hands clasped, attempting to make eye contact with Maurice whenever he turned. This time he succeeded. The foundation he had proposed was already being established. A partnership with a local nonprofit was formed within weeks of the settlement. The Delroy Housing Fund would provide grants to families at risk of homelessness, particularly those who had been disadvantaged by legal complexities and overlooked actions. "I didn't desire revenge," Maurice told Kimber Rowland in his final interview. "I simply wanted the truth to endure beyond the falsehood." It had taken years to reach this point. For years, he had experienced being overlooked, marginalized, and disregarded. However, the instant he entered through those glass doors, holding a creased envelope and a legacy of suffering, things began to shift. And currently, he was simply a man identified by a name. He had acquired a modest, well-kept house not distant from the outskirts of Alcoa, close to the same areas where his father had previously constructed porches and fences. It wasn't elaborate, merely a neat area, a functional sink, a bed to relax in. Occasionally, he would sit on a plastic chair outside, sipping coffee and greeting children cycling up the slope. On other occasions, he collaborated with local high schools, discussing land ownership, family histories, and the consequences of oblivion with students. Preserve your documents, he advised them. Retain your names. Ensure no one erases your people from the narrative. People now referred to him as Mr. Langston. At times, even Sir, but the designation he valued most was the one his grandfather had attained. Builder. It wasn't about buildings, but about something larger. Legacy. He never anticipated forgiveness from the bank. However, it wasn't necessary. What he required, he received: an acknowledgement, a correction, and the opportunity for those who followed to declare, "I belong here too." The bank continued its operations, but the employees carried themselves differently. They engaged with people they had previously overlooked. They posed questions rather than making assumptions. The transformation wasn't flawless, but it represented a meaningful shift. One afternoon, several months following the resolution of events, Brittany approached him outside the community center. "Mr. Langston?" she asked, her voice betraying nervousness. "Yes," he replied. I've been taking night classes. Real estate law." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" he inquired. "After everything that happened, I realized how much I didn't know. About ownership, history, how things get passed down or lost." Morris smiled, slow and genuine. "Good for you." She paused. "I'm sorry for how I treated you that first day." He nodded. An apology wasn't necessary. It was owed to the individual who would next enter. She considered this thoughtfully, responding, "Yes, I will." He retrieved a copy of the original deed, a replica, to be exact, from his coat and gave it to her. "Keep this. Use it in class. Teach someone something." She accepted it with care, as if it were fragile. As she departed, Morris looked towards the street and observed a group of teenagers assembling at the bus stop across the road. One of them gestured towards the plaque. The others drew closer to listen. He remained silent, allowing them to continue. He simply observed, a quiet sense of pride welling up within him as his grandfather's name emerged in the discussion once more. Perhaps that's how genuine transformation truly begins. Not through rage, nor solely through the pursuit of justice, but through remembrance and the bravery to keep it alive. Should you experience a feeling while hearing Morris's narrative, do not hold it back. Spread it. Discuss it. And if there's a family name you haven't mentioned in some time, vocalize it. The impact of legacies endures only when we actively preserve them. Subscribe for more stories that illuminate the true meaning of dignity. In a park, she performed a life-saving act for someone she didn't know. 3 hours passed, and then 5 high-end automobiles arrived at her residence. The subsequent events rendered her utterly stunned. 20 years. That was the duration of Denise Lattimore's service to that hospital. She wasn't simply a nurse, she was the nurse. The one they consulted when situations became critical. The one who eagerly accepted the less desirable shifts. Holidays, weekends, overnight assignments. Denise was consistently present. And then, abruptly, she ceased her service. The electronic message arrived at 6:42 a.m. While she was sipping her first cup of coffee, her shift wasn't supposed to start until 7:30. There was no meeting, no call. Just a subject line that read position status update. She clicked it and read, "We regret to inform you that due to internal restructuring, your position has been terminated effective immediately. Your final paycheck will be deposited by the end of the week. We thank you for your years of service." That was it. No signature, no explanation. Denise watched the screen, anticipating additional information. A follow-up, a phone number. Anything, nothing. She blinked, shut the laptop, and remained still. Her daughter, Mecca, was still asleep upstairs. The last thing Denise desired was for her to awaken and observe her mother falling apart before 7 a.m. Denise placed the coffee mug in the sink and stood for a full minute with her hands braced on the counter. She didn't cry. Not yet. She grabbed her keys, slipped on her running shoes, and left a note on the table. Went for a walk. "Be back soon. Love you." She didn't even bother to change out of her scrubs. She walked out the door and headed for Avondale Park, one of the oldest in Birmingham. It was quiet this time of morning. Just a few regulars walking their dogs, a jogger here and there. Denise wasn't sure what she was doing. She hadn't planned this walk. She hadn't planned anything. A weight settled in her chest, a feeling she needed to process. The phrases from the email echoed in her mind. "We regret to inform you." She considered it harsh, not just the dismissal, but the moment it occurred. Her daughter had recently begun her studies at Miles College. Tuition payments were approaching, and Denise had been striving to manage every dollar to cover expenses. There had been no prior notice, no meeting, no warning, simply a formal, impersonal message. She walked until her calves ached. She located a bench overlooking the small lake and sat down. Her phone vibrated. It was Mecca. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" It read, "Didn't hear you leave." Denise looked at the message. She began to type a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just needed air. Love you." She set the phone down and leaned back against the bench. The sky was a gentle, early blue, the kind of color that could make you momentarily forget how difficult life can be. "I gave them everything," she murmured, not realizing she had spoken aloud. To anyone else observing, she appeared like just another woman taking a morning walk. But internally, Denise was falling apart, not solely due to the job loss, but from the silence that followed. No one from the hospital contacted her. No one sent a message. 20 years, and not a single farewell. She rubbed her eyes. She wouldn't cry in a park, but something within her altered right then. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was grief. Perhaps it was anger disguised in a gentler form. For the first time in a long time, Denise felt still. Not okay, just still. Then she heard it. A sound. Quick, sharp, like someone hitting the pavement hard. She turned her head. A man had fallen near the trail, just beyond the row of hedges. He was maybe in his late 50s, face down on the ground, motionless. People looked, but no one moved. But Denise did. Denise didn't hesitate. Her body kicked into gear before her mind even caught up. She rose quickly, running towards the man prone on the asphalt. As she approached, the heat of the pavement was noticeable, along with the odor of sweat and a metallic tang. She wasn't sure if it was blood or fear. He remained still. "Sir?" she asked, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" There was no response. Several individuals had paused at a safe distance. No one advanced. She carefully turned him over, observing his chest for signs of life, his neck for a pulse. His complexion was ashen. A bluish tint was appearing on his lips. Denise placed her fingers on the side of his neck. She felt nothing. "Call 911, she shouted without looking up. Someone mumbled, "Already did," but it seemed unimportant. She began counting seconds. She tilted his head back, checking his airway. Then she leaned in, delivered 2 quick breaths, and started compressions. 1, 2, 3. Her hands moved as if she's done this many times before. But this wasn't a training dummy. This was real. This was a matter of life or death. An audience observed, whispering and recording with their phones. However, their presence was insignificant. It was solely about her and him, and the sound of her hands striking his chest. "Come on," she murmured. "Don't you dare give up." He appeared to be in his mid-50s, dressed in a fitted black workout set, with a wedding ring and an Apple Watch. He seemed like the type of man who should be too healthy to collapse in public. But hearts are not governed by appearances. 1 minute passed, then 2. Denise felt sweat soaking through her scrubs, her hair plastered to her forehead. Her arms were sore, and her back throbbed. She continued working, focusing on her breathing. She compressed and counted. The silence was intense, a silence that felt like it was holding its breath. Then he gasped. The breath was weak and strained, but it was a breath. Denise moved closer. "Hey, are you with me?" His eyelids flickered. His chest moved a slight movement. Paramedics arrived less than a minute later. 2 of them rushed from the ambulance, carrying equipment. "I got him breathing," Denise said swiftly, stepping aside to allow them to take over. "No pulse when I arrived." I immediately began compressions. One of the medics acknowledged her. "Are you a nurse?" She replied I was. He didn't have time to inquire further. They proceeded with urgency. Oxygen mask, defibrillator pads, and vital signs assessment. Denise retreated, allowing the trained professionals to take charge. Her hands trembled. Someone behind her commented, "You saved him." She turned to see a woman, mid-30s, a jogger, visibly anxious. "You were incredible," the woman added. I didn't know what to do." Denise nodded once, then turned her eyes back to the man on the ground. She didn't need thanks. She just needed him to live. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, one of the paramedics looked at her and said, "You bought him time. That man's lucky you were here." Denise gave a tired half-smile. "I guess we both are," she said, watching as the ambulance pulled away. Sirens off. That was usually a good sign. The crowd began to thin, individuals returning to their daily lives as if nothing had occurred, as though they hadn't just witnessed a stranger die in return before their very eyes. Denise remained still for a brief moment, her heart racing. She then proceeded back towards the bench where it all began, sat down once more, and picked up her phone. Mecca had sent another message. "Mom, are you okay? Would you like me to bring breakfast?" Denise gazed at the message, her thumbs pausing above the screen. She then typed, "I'll be home soon." An event occurred. "I'll explain when I return," she texted. She didn't know the man's name, didn't know if he'd survived the day. Her actions weren't for praise. It was a reaction. It was inherent. It was her purpose. Although her professional role had shifted, her identity remained unchanged. But the world had a peculiar habit of returning when you least anticipated it. Denise didn't realize how quickly that return would happen. 3 hours later, Denise was back home. Mud clung to her shoes, a souvenir from the park, and she was still wearing her scrubs. Mecca had prepared eggs and toast, placing them on the stove before heading to her shift at the daycare. The house was silent, punctuated only by the ticking of the wall clock, which consistently ran 5 minutes fast. Denise settled onto the front porch, cradling a chipped mug of green tea. She held it with both hands, attempting to find comfort in its warmth rather than dwell on the persistent tension beneath her ribs. Her thoughts were jumbled, with fragments of the incident in the park and recollections of the chilling email. She couldn't erase the image of his face, the initial stillness of his chest. She remembered the moment she felt a return of life under her hands. She had witnessed people flatline previously, but this felt deeply personal. She took a deliberate sip, then she registered the sound. Engines, several of them. She raised her head from her mug and blinked. 5 luxury vehicles approached her street, following one another. These weren't simply elegant cars. They were the type usually seen in magazines or on social media influencers' profiles. Among them was a Lucid Air, a Mercedes Maybach, a matte black Escalade reflecting the afternoon light, a Rolls-Royce Ghost, and trailing behind, a sleek Aston Martin that emitted a distinct, almost living sound. The vehicles decelerated and halted directly in front of her house. A peculiar sensation arose within her, not fear precisely, but a more profound feeling, a quiet prompting. This concerns the events that followed. The entrance of the Lucid opened. A man emerged, tall, wearing a sharp suit, untied, charcoal gray with a black shirt beneath. He was clean-shaven, silver highlighting his temples, his face bearing a tranquil expression as if possessing an eternity. It required a moment for recognition, but when he spoke, her breath halted. "Ms. Lattimore," she rose deliberately. He advanced, his walk fluid and assured, yet unpretentious. "I believe you saved my life earlier today," he stated. At the park, Denise peered, trying to recognize him. Appearing calm, without any signs of distress, with his complexion restored and his eyes bright, he seemed almost transformed. But it was indeed him. You collapsed," she observed. "I did," he confirmed with a slight nod. "And I understand I wouldn't have recovered if it weren't for your assistance," she commented, setting down her mug. "How did you locate me?" He responded with a gentle, almost regretful smile. "A person with my resources usually has people managing specifics, but let's just say I was highly driven." She felt her throat tighten. "I didn't do it for any reason." "I know," he said swiftly. "That's precisely why I'm here." A younger woman, likely in her mid-30s, emerged from behind him, stepping out of the Escalade with a thick envelope and a small tablet. She remained silent, simply waiting. "My name's Roland Greaves," the man stated. "I have several companies, primarily in logistics and software. It's not a flashy business, but I've achieved success. Earlier today, I was approximately 30 seconds from not experiencing another sunrise." Denise adjusted her posture, her jaw moving. She wasn't certain of the direction this conversation would take, but it felt significant. "I want to speak with you," Roland stated. "Just 5 minutes. I'm not here to offer you a product or create a disturbance, but I have a debt I'm unsure how to resolve." She hesitated, remaining uncertain. She then said softly, "You're welcome to sit if you wish." He nodded once. "Thank you." They proceeded together to the porch. She observed the cars passing by. No one else emerged from the vehicles. As he settled into a chair, Roland surveyed the surroundings. "Pleasant place. It has a lived-in feel." "That's right," she replied. "Mecca's room is the one with the damaged blind." She explained that she had broken it while trying to chase away a wasp. He smiled. "Sounds like a spirited individual." "Is she?" A brief pause occurred. He then turned to her. "May I ask you a personal question?" She nodded. "Why didn't you wait for another person to assist?" Denise inhaled deeply. "Because if it were me, I would have hoped someone wouldn't wait." He observed his gaze downwards. He nodded slowly. Then, he looked in her eyes once more. I needed to hear that, but Roland hadn't come solely to thank her. He'd come with a proposition, one that would assess the extent of her trust in the kindness of strangers. Denise leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed over her chest. "So," she said, maintaining a level tone, "what precisely is this concerning?" Roland moved closer, his elbows gently on his knees. "You gave me 12 minutes of your time, and in those 12 minutes you didn't pause. You didn't inquire who I was or what I might provide. You simply defended me. Denise remained silent. She wasn't swayed by words. She's heard numerous eloquent presentations at hospital fundraisers and board meetings. This felt distinct, but she still didn't understand his direction. I established a company from nothing, he stated. It began in a garage in Baton Rouge. My first product was shipped from a rented storage unit. I navigated through losses, lawsuits, and everything in between. Now I have 500 employees and the ability to set my own guidelines. He paused. But despite all of that, I've never encountered someone helping me without expecting something in return. Not since my mother. That sort of generosity. It alters your viewpoint. Denise observed him intently. So, what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Greaves? I'm not seeking assistance. He raised a hand. Nor am I. I'm not attempting to provide a rescue. I'm aiming to make an investment. She frowned slightly. I researched your background. He continued. After my assistant located the incident report, I requested your employment history. Hope you aren't upset. Denise gave a humorless laugh. I'm accustomed to people investigating my affairs. This week has been filled with new experiences. Roland smiled. You were the most sought-after nurse in your department. There were notes from patients in the files about you. One woman mentioned that you were the reason she was able to get out of bed following her surgery. She also threw a shoe at me when I instructed her to perform her breathing exercises. He laughed. Nevertheless, she recalled you fondly. Then he retrieved something from his pocket. It was small, square, and black. He sat on the arm of her chair. A key fob. What is that? She inquired, looking at it but not touching it. It's for one of the cars parked outside, he said. The Lucid. Brand new. It's yours if you'd like it. Denise paused, studying it. Are you serious? She asked. As a second heart attack. He replied, only partially teasing. She didn't take the key. Why me? She questioned. I don't know many people like you, he stated plainly, and I've been thinking lately. I want to surround myself with people who move toward the problem, not away from it. People who act without needing a reason. He looked at her, his expression gentling. So I'd like to offer you a job. Denise blinked. He continued, I'm launching a new initiative. A wellness foundation linked to our company, focused on underserved communities, free clinics, training programs, and mental health outreach. Needs assistance. Funding is available, but we lack the personnel to establish it. We require someone with your expertise to help build it. Someone who understands the system's complexities and knows what individuals truly need. He paused. You would be director of clinical programs, responsible for setting the strategic direction and building your own team. The compensation is excellent, with full benefits. And you would have the autonomy to shape the foundation. She stared at him, speechless. Alternatively, he suggested softly, you're allowed to decline. I will still provide the vehicle. I will still express my gratitude. However, if you accept, I believe we have the potential to create something substantial. A pause settled between them, but it lacked tension. At length, Denise inquired, what would motivate you to entrust such a significant duty to someone you have only just met? Roland remained composed, stating, because occasionally, the instance in which someone rescues your life reveals that they are the individual you were meant to have known from the beginning. Denise found herself at a loss for words. She glanced at the key fob once more. Then, she looked at him. You'll give me time to think, take as long as you want. Just know this. I didn't come here to reward you. I came because I think the world needs more people like you making decisions that matter. But as soon as Roland left, Denise's heart remained unsettled. If anything, it pounded faster, because accepting meant stepping into something she wasn't sure she could manage, and that scared her more than losing a job ever did. That night, Denise remained restless. She sat on the bed's edge in the dimness, the faint light from the hallway offering little illumination. Her fingers followed the contours of the advanced key fob still on her nightstand, and used since Roland departed. It seemed overly substantial, overly swift, too remarkable to be genuine. She had experienced disappointment previously, not solely connected to the hospital. Years earlier, Mecca's father had pledged them security, only to disappear as debts accumulated. Denise understood from a young age to be wary of smiles, even those that appeared gentle. However, this opportunity felt different. It wasn't charity. It was a chance, one she hadn't anticipated. Needing a moment to herself, she put on a hoodie, placed the key fob in her pocket, and went outside. The Lucid remained, parked silently beneath the streetlight, its design distinct, its paint rich and flawless like midnight. She opened the driver's side door, anticipating an alarm. There was none. The vehicle greeted her as if familiar with her. Within, the cabin remained still and quiet, the dashboard illuminated with a gentle hum. She refrained from starting the engine. Instead, she simply sat, her palms resting on the steering wheel, inhaling a scent reminiscent of fresh leather and potential. She didn't register Mecca until the passenger door opened. "Okay, Mom," her daughter stated, entering the car. "Who did you rescue? And what sort of James Bond operation were you involved in?" Denise looked up, surprised. "What are you doing awake? The porch light was on, and you weren't in your room." "That's code for Mom is spiraling." Mecca glanced around. "This car is insane," by the way, Denise sighed. "It was the man in the park. He found me." Mecca turned sharply. "What? How?" He's not just some guy. His name's Roland Greaves, owns like 3 companies. He offered me a job." Mecca's eyes widened. "Doing what?" "Building something. A clinic. A program. He wants me to run it, wait. He once met you, almost lost his life, and now wants you to lead his company's health division?" That's the summary. Mecca reclined in the seat. "And you're presently in the car he provided. Because you haven't decided yet. I don't want to accept something I didn't earn." "Mom," Mecca said, looking at her, "you save his life. You deserve the air in this car." Denise remained quiet. "Look," Mecca continued, "I understand. You're apprehensive. This feels like an opportunity that's almost unbelievable. You always said, fear doesn't get to run the show. You told me that the night before my first recital. That was different." "No, it wasn't." Mecca's voice softened. "This might be the first time in your life someone sees your worth openly. Not after 10 years. Not when they're desperate. But right now. And you're hesitating because you're used to fighting for scraps." Denise turned to look at her. "You think I should take it?" "I think. Do not allow fear to guide your decision." They remained silent for a while longer. The following morning, Denise drove the Lucid. She drove slowly, not far, just a few miles down to a nearby diner, where she and Mecca used to eat breakfast when Mecca was little. She needed a place to think without feeling confined. While she drank her coffee, an older man in a corduroy jacket sitting at the counter gave her a polite nod. "Beautiful car outside," he said. Denise turned, feeling a little unsteady, still adjusting. "Can't complain about good fortune," he remarked, moving his cup. "You simply need to ensure you utilize it wisely." But Denise understood that blessings invariably carried a cost, and the subsequent action would necessitate her abandoning everything she believed about herself, to evolve into someone else. Assuming she possessed the bravery, Denise remained in her kitchen, her arms crossed, observing the document Roland's assistant had provided. It detailed the job description and compensation package. The title, Director of Clinical Programs, still felt unfamiliar, like something that belonged to someone else. The numbers on the salary line alone made her chest tighten. She'd always been modest, made her way on steady, honest work. Never dreamed of 6 figures, certainly not with benefits and a personal driver listed in the perks. It felt unreal, uncomfortable even, but not because it wasn't real, because part of her believed she didn't deserve it. Denise answered the phone, not to contact Roland, but to reach out to someone else, a name she hadn't spoken in years. "Hi, is this Bernardine Willis?" A moment of silence. Then a recognizable voice responded, "Yes, who is calling?" It was Denise. Denise Lattimore. They had worked together at Jefferson Medical when they were both assigned to the night shift. Another pause, then a surprised laugh. "Girl, are you kidding me?" "Denise? From 2A? I thought you disappeared. I was let go this week." The line was silent for a moment. "And you?" "You were excellent." "That's what I believed as well." Denise outlined the situation concisely. The collapse. The man. The offer. Bernardine expressed quiet disbelief. "And you're contacting me because?" "Because I harbor doubts. And because I fear I might not be adequate." Bernardine responded immediately. "Denise, the hospital never appreciated your value. We all recognize that. You mentored half those new employees while they rewarded positions to individuals who couldn't recall the crash cart protocols. Denise laughed once. I recall, when someone recognizes your value and offers you the opportunity to influence things, embrace it. Denise felt a warmth behind her eyes. And what if it fails? She inquired. Then you'll leave with your head held high, as you always have. But don't decline because you believe you'll be out of place. You're not. More than most. That night, Denise didn't pace the floor. She didn't overthink. She retrieved the contract, reviewed it completely, and then signed. The following morning, Roland contacted her. I allowed you a few days, he stated. You weren't required to have them, Denise responded. My decision is made. A pause followed on his end, then a drawn-out breath. Are you certain? I am certain. She continued. However, I require one thing from you. Anything. She clarified. I don't want to be a token hire. I don't want you to showcase me as your feel-good project. If I am joining, I'm coming to work. I will build the team. I will call the shots. Roland's voice became serious. That's precisely why I wanted you, he said. And with a chuckle, he added, I'm not addressing you as sir. Deal, he concluded. A meeting was scheduled for Monday. He would have his legal team finalize onboarding procedures. She would visit the campus they were assessing in Tuscaloosa, the location for the first community clinic. After she ended the call, Denise paused in the kitchen, her bare feet on the tile floor, as sunlight streamed through the blinds. She had just made what felt like the biggest decision of her life. It wasn't born of necessity, but of deliberate choice. Mecca appeared at the head of the stairs, still in pajamas, rubbing her eyes. You're up early, she observed. I have work to do. Her daughter addressed her. Did you take it? Mecca replied, I did. Mecca smiled. I'm proud of you, Mom, she said. I'm proud of me too. However, Denise understood that this wasn't the conclusion. It marked the start of a life she never imagined achieving, and she was now entering it, not as someone pleading for a place, but as someone asserting her right to it. When Denise first passed through the double glass doors of the building in Tuscaloosa, the feeling wasn't one of intrusion. It felt like returning to a familiar place. The building wasn't elaborate, not yet. The flooring was concrete, the walls unadorned, and wires still protruded from the ceiling, but she envisioned it clearly. She saw the intake desk positioned to the right, a children's play area directly opposite, consultation rooms extending along the rear hallway, a location where care would not be a luxury. It would be commonplace. Roland entered, carrying rolled-up blueprints beneath one arm and a coffee in the other. He gave it to her silently. She smiled and accepted it. Day one, he stated. More like step one, she responded. During the subsequent weeks, Denise began her work. She sought out not only former colleagues, but also individuals who had been overlooked, underutilized, and undervalued. This included nurses, aides, translators, and even a former janitor who desired to learn administrative tasks. Denise possessed the ability to nurture potential, training those with the willingness to learn. Her focus wasn't constructing a clinic, it was cultivating a culture. Each morning, she drove the same car, a gift from Lucid Greaves, not to display it, but to recall the origins of her work. It was a reminder of that pivotal moment in the park, hands placed on a stranger's chest, desperately hoping to detect a heartbeat. After 6 months, the clinic quietly opened its doors, without fanfare or publicity, simply relying on patience. A woman accompanied by her 2 children, who had not received medical care in 3 years. A man with uncontrolled diabetes, a teenager seeking assistance with anxiety. Denise welcomed each individual as if they were old friends. There were no barriers of paperwork or procedure, just compassionate care. One afternoon, while she was revising intake protocols at her desk, her receptionist softly knocked on the open door and announced, "There's someone here requesting to see you." Without a name given, Denise entered the lobby and paused, visibly surprised. He was the man from the park. Roland had visited, sure, but this wasn't him. This was the man she'd knelt beside, whose chest she compressed until life returned. Dressed in a simple navy sweater and jeans, with a quiet smile that conveyed something deeper than words. "I never thanked you properly," he said. "You did more than enough." He walked over slowly, pulled something from his pocket. A small, flat velvet box. Denise shook her head. If that's jewelry, I swear I'll toss it right back. He laughed. No, it's not jewelry. She opened the box. Inside was a bronze medallion, etched with an emblem she didn't recognize. It's from my mother's side, he said. Passed down 3 generations. My grandmother gave it to my mom when she became the first black woman in her district to run a public health clinic. Denise's fingers closed gently around it. I think she'd have wanted you to have it. She swallowed hard. I'm not family. You're exactly what family looks like, he said softly. At least the kind that saves lives. Later that night, Denise sat on her porch again. Not with tea, with silence. The good kind. The kind that lets you breathe. The street was quiet. No more engines. No more questions. Just peace. Mecca stepped out, leaned on the railing beside her. Long day? She asked. Best kind, Denise said. They sat together, watching the sky turn purple over the rooftops. After a long pause, Mecca said, it's funny. What is? How you save a life, and somehow it ended up saving yours too. Denise didn't reply. She didn't need to, because she understood now. Some moments fundamentally alter everything. Not because they're dramatic or widely known, but because they reveal your true character when you are alone. And when you act from love, without any expectation of reward, sometimes life responds in an unexpected way. Should you find yourself in a situation where your efforts feel unseen and your work goes unrecognized, please recall this. Gratitude may not always be expressed openly, but it remains. And when it does reappear, it can be more significant than you could have foreseen. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who could benefit from hearing it. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. We have more stories similar to this that demonstrate the profound impact of a single positive decision.